So you want to learn how to manage change as a leader because you know that there's going to be resistance. You know there's going to be people that are either going to be subtly or not so subtly resisting what you want to do to change, but you're in charge of making the change happen. Today we're going to talk about that. My name is Kelly. I was a nurse to CEO, and I'm here to give you tips and tricks to get the life and career of your dreams. So, again, you have to expect resistance. It is absolutely going to happen with the change that you want to create. According to the Harvard Business Review, some of the main reasons people resist change is number one, that loss of control. Perhaps they were in charge of something, or perhaps they were the ones leading something, and now this change is going to change that control. That causes fear in others, and that causes fear in perhaps not wanting to do that, or maybe they had the idea of the prior change that you're trying to implement, and they feel defensive about that idea or change. So one of the best strategies is to involve those people that you feel, or at least maybe a person that you feel will have the most resistance to that change, involve them in the process. Involve them in input gathering, or perhaps they can even be involved in a group setting for the decision. Now, not all decisions are going to be this way. You may not have the absolute authority to allow more people to be involved in that, but if you can, that is one of the best strategies you can do to get buy-in for that change. Another reason why people get resistant to that change is it's a surprise, right? It came out of nowhere, or perhaps they feel like it came out of nowhere. One of the strategies you can do to help ease fear in that uncertainty world is to not have it be so much of a surprise. If you're able, maybe you plant seeds along the way that maybe there's some things not working and we really need to look at processes and changes to this. You start planting those seeds. Sometimes you have the meeting before the meeting. What do I mean by that? Maybe you have small group settings talking about the change that needs to be implemented, and more importantly, the why it needs to be implemented. And having that meeting before the meeting, you get to hear what are their fears, what are their challenges, what are they going to say or do, or what will others say or do that may bring a barrier to the change you want to do. What that does is that gives you time to then figure out, okay, this is going to be a barrier, or this is going to be a resistance. I need to think about this when I bring this to the full group, and how I'm either A, going to discuss it, or B, maybe we need to change something in the change we're doing to make it more buy-in for those that will be working with it. So remember, nobody likes to be surprised when a change is coming. And so really think about what are strategies you can do to prevent that surprise from happening and get those reactions as early as possible so you can pivot and make changes if needed. The unknown is scary. So how can you create a safety zone with it? If there is fear in this new change, because maybe it is pretty drastic, make sure you're creating safe zones for people to talk to you or talk to others that you trust that can help explain the why the change is necessary. That is so key. Everyone needs to understand the why behind the change. So if you're explaining that and you really cannot over communicate it enough, which is why I suggest bringing either stakeholders in early into the input, or having meetings before the meetings, so that way it's not a complete surprise when the change occurs and you have more buy-in. Another reason why people may resist change is they feel everything is different, right? We went from our comfortable zone of what we knew, what we understood, to now everything's different. So we are creatures of habit, right? We are creatures of routine. So we need to make sure we're setting clear expectations as to what the change is and what the change isn't. So make sure not only are you explaining why the change is necessary and what that looks like, but also explains what isn't changing. Because sometimes, the mind will play this story in our head that, oh my gosh, my whole world is flipped upside down in what I knew. And often that's not the case. Often there are still routines that will stay in place. So make sure you're pointing that out, and that is equally as important as pointing the new change out. Maybe there's a loss of a role or a position or a place. If you're having to make a structural change, there's going to be folks that maybe were in those roles that now aren't going to be in those roles. And that can be really disheartening for some folks. It also can be fearful for if you reported to a certain person and now you're reporting to somebody else. All of that fear and that uncertainty is part of that change. So maybe there's some resistance to the person who was in charge and now maybe is questioning the leadership of the next person in charge wanting to make that change. What I would recommend is really be sensitive to that. First of all, own that and understand there's going to be some sensitivity all around for that. So be sensitive to that. That's not saying you excuse certain behaviors, and that's not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying make sure you understand that, recognize it, and be sensitive to that. Most importantly, don't badmouth the prior process, prior person, prior whatever that is that you're changing. The last thing you want to do is badmouth prior things because you don't know in that group setting who liked it, who didn't, or what was happening there. So you really do not want to badmouth it. Just go into it with a positive attitude, with an enthusiasm for the change, and have folks that you had pre-meetings with or that you know will be leaders in this. And leaders isn't necessarily always people with a formal title. You have informal leaders in your group, in your setting that you can talk to say, hey, I really need your leadership here. Here's why we need to make this change. What can you do to help spread this message with me? Doing those things and finding champions, finding informal leaders and formal leaders to help you when they understand the why, bring that message forward will also help, because that means there's not meetings after the meeting occurring that may be negatively impacting or resisting the change you're trying to get. So really think about that too when you're going into that position of change. There may be a concern of competence. Perhaps the person coming in is perceived to not have as much experience, or the change coming in has been tried before and it didn't work. So there may be a perception of competence or incompetence. This is where it's really going to be important that you listen to the concerns, because perhaps there's something you didn't think about that needs to be pivoted on. I think that's vitally important. But if it is just kind of a repetitive of, we've already tried that, and they're not really, adding value to the discussion, then you need to think about what is the reason behind the competence, and you need to train. So the one thing I would say is training, and more training, and you can communicate, and over communicate. This is where that's really going to have an impact, because if you have someone that really doesn't get on board the process you're trying to get, you will have given, and everyone will have seen that you have given the proper training and the proper communication to make this work. Going into it with the attitude that we're going to make this work, knowing there may be a time where it won't, and that's a different discussion. But don't assume that everyone will have the competence they need to do the new process. You need to always assume that you'll need extra training, and that will help alleviate that fear that they have. You need to recognize there's probably going to be more work involved with the process. And that also can cause some fear in others, that there's going to be more work, more time involved. Maybe they're already feeling stretched. So first of all, recognize that anytime there's a new change, a new process, there's probably going to be, again, more training involved. It's going to be a little slower until people get their groove and understand what's happening. So recognize that and prepare for that. Acknowledge it and prepare for it, and that will help alleviate that fear of more work. Recognize there's going to be a ripple effect, or there could be a ripple effect. One of the key rules is to make sure you're involving all the stakeholders. So if this change is going to have a ripple effect on other departments and you didn't involve them either in the input or the thought of the resistance that could occur with everything we just discussed, that could be a key mistake. So really think about, before you acknowledge or before you roll out a change, that you're thinking about who are all the stakeholders that would be involved in this. And you really need to do all these processes with them as well. Training, communication, input. How is this going to impact their world or their department? And that's how you bring the departments together. Otherwise, you're really going to have a silo effect or an us versus them, which is the last thing you want when you're a leader trying to make change in your organization, or at least make change with the group that you're trying to be effective in. You have to think about all those stakeholders. And by doing some of these tips that we talked about, you can really get buy-in and help that message move forward in a more positive, effective way. Okay, so to summarize, the best strategies to overcome that resistance to change is to, first of all, be very enthusiastic about it. Be very enthusiastic and positive about the change coming. Know there's going to be resistance to the change. That is absolutely a given in some portion of that. And I don't care if it's an individual or a group. Try to involve as many stakeholders that's possible in the input gathering, which is one of the best strategies to help make that decision if possible. Have meetings before the meetings. Make sure you're planting seeds if you're able, to that people are hearing it and it's not this complete uncertain surprise. Be sensitive to whatever the prior history was or is, so that you're acknowledging that, but you're also moving forward in a positive way. And involve everyone that you can in this change. Training, and over-communicate. So hopefully this was helpful. If this was helpful to you, please give me a like or a comment. And please comment, what do you find hard with resistance to change? What have you found, or what have you used that's worked? Or what have you found that really hasn't worked? To help our viewers with that as well. Again, if you've liked this, please give me a like or subscribe. It really helps the algorithm move my channel forward, and we will talk soon.